I think that Russia's going to fall apart economically. Ukraine right now is the most heavily mined country in the world or in history. Russia is in terminal decline. There just aren't enough babies being born.
Mitzi, welcome back to the Jedburgh Podcast.
I'm totally thrilled to be back because I just so admire what you're about.
Well, we've been planning the follow-up for quite a while, actually. We were supposed to meet months ago now, and I was on my way down to actually meet you outside of D.C., and then I became that guy on the George Washington Bridge who hits the pothole and has immediate flat tire. So I had to call you up and be like, I'm not going to make it because I'm literally sitting on the middle of the George Washington Bridge.
But we will make up for it today.
Well, we're going to talk about Ukraine. The first time you were on was in July 2021. We talked, and that was episode 19. We've done. Can you believe that we've released over 100 episodes since you and I had that conversation? And I was still in my mother's attic during the times of COVID. And now here we are, we're a year and a half later, and we're going to talk about your recent visits to Ukraine. You've been twice. You're looking at potentially going for a third time. You've covered human trafficking. You've covered arms sales. You've covered the police involvement there on the Ukrainian side, and so many of the different political and military factors that have all come to this event in history, which is so unprecedented in modern age, right? Who would have thought that in 2023 we're going to have a ground war in Europe led by, our friends, the Russians and Vladimir Putin? So many takeaways. In February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. The numbers are staggering of how many have been killed, how many have been wounded. We've seen numbers upwards of 100,000 people. You've been there. What have you seen, and why get involved?
Oh, I've wondered that myself, but I guess I'm a little bit influenced by, well, my childhood, where my father said that you get your identity through service, not through money. And the greatest pleasure his wealth ever gave him, he was the co-founder and president of the Sheraton Hotel chain, said the greatest pleasure his money ever gave him was in giving it away. Well, that's kind of a background a little bit, but I'm also influenced by Mother Teresa, who used to say the good that we can do, we must do. So if I can do anything to help, I must do it. And I do think that I have a niche that works. And I'll put. I know you're going to ask me what it is, so I'll answer the question I think you'd be asking.
For it.
Okay, I came because the police, the General Nebitov, head of the Kyiv Region Police, which has 6,400 policemen, he invited me, and he invited me because I'd done a story on human trafficking in Ukraine. And right after writing it, I get this invitation to a Zoom with the general inviting me to come see for myself. And he wanted somebody to tell what the Russians were doing to the police, because everybody's writing about what the non-governmental organizations are doing, what the military are doing. But he said up to then, and we're talking May of last year, up to then, nobody had been writing about what the police do.
Well, and the police are such an instrumental force. I mean, we saw this in Iraq. One of the critical mistakes that I believe we made when we went into Iraq was the fact that we disbanded the police. I mean, the police are the local entities. They understand what's going on the ground. In open conflict like this, even though the police by definition are not necessarily a military organization, they have a huge effect on what's going on the ground, interaction with the populace, and by default often become an extension of the military and get involved in the conflict. You've been very involved with them. You've given 18 police cars since the war started. You're looking at giving a series of boats that the police can use.
And I'd love to explain why police cars are important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who would think of spending their money on police cars? Well, here's the answer. When the Russians the Russians have a playbook. They've invaded 8 countries since the Russian Federation began in 1991. 8 countries. There's actually only been 4 years when they haven't been actively invading a country. And their playbook is, one of their first priorities is to destroy every part of the police capability that they can. They bomb police stations and they destroy police cars. They either steal or destroy them. And the same with police patrol boats. And they do this because it magnifies the demoralization of the local populace. Because if your country's being invaded and at the same time the prisons are open and the bad guys are loose stealing, looting, and raping, and you can't contact the police, the playbook is that's a way of demoralizing the populace.
We create
Well,
chaos.
create chaos. And in the case of the 18 police cars, they went to the Chernobyl exclusion area, which is full of radiation that can kill you. Well, the police, their fleet was 23 cars. I replaced 18 of them. Before I gave them the 18 cars, they had no ability to keep poachers out of the highly irradiated areas, which meant that I've heard that there are more than 1 million tons of highly irradiated metal that goes into the global market, and somebody opening a doorknob in Japan might be handling on a daily basis highly irradiated metal that came from Chernobyl. The police cars help keep that in check, or they will now that they have them.
Wow. And you went and visited the Chernobyl area when you were there on one of your recent trips.
It was the coolest thing in the world for a journalist. And by the way, I'm 82 and proud of it, but I love being a war correspondent, having adventures like what I'm about to describe, because there are pockets that are very highly irradiated still. And by the way, Western journalists haven't been invited into the areas that I got to see because they're controlled by the police, and the police just don't let people in. They did for me under the following circumstances. They've mapped the hot spots, and when we were passing a hot spot, I'm wearing a dosimeter, and we're traveling at 80 miles an hour, and I got to see and photograph and learn about things that Western journalists haven't. Cool?
That's amazing. I'm very jealous. You talked about Russia's playbook. You talked about some of the tactics that they've used. We've seen now firsthand over the last year plus that our assessment of Russian capability, in my mind, was probably greatly, we overestimated their capabilities. A lot has been exposed through this conflict. Russia's capabilities, Ukraine's capabilities, America's involvement with Ukraine over the last 10 years as our special operators trained so many of their military units, which, I believe, I'm a little biased and that's okay, but I believe is one of the primary reasons why they've been in the fight for so long. But a population has been displaced. Entire cities are leveled and gone. It's a David versus Goliath struggle. We have seen the massive involvement of not only the U.S., but the international community. And some numbers here, the U.S. has spent almost $80 billion in aid for Ukraine, $47 billion military aid, $26 billion in financial aid, $4 billion in humanitarian aid. An incredible amount of money. And when you look at the comparative numbers, our largest recipient of military aid, primarily from the U.S., was Israel in 2020, and that was $3.3 billion. So we've blown that number away. And 42 countries have contributed to Ukraine in the last year plus. But the U.S.'s involvement is double all of the EU countries' contributions combined. So we have gone, for lack of a better term, all in on this fight. Why is this so important for America? And we've had a number of these conversations with some different parties, but I do want to hear from you because you have a unique perspective as a journalist. We've talked to military leaders about this and CIA, leaders. But from your perspective, as we look at America, why is this an all or nothing battle where we have to go all in?
Okay, well, I'm going to thank God that America is doing. I'm so proud of this, I hardly know what to say because it's the right thing to do. The Ukrainians, they don't deserve to have their country destroyed. And I'm thinking of a conversation that I had with a person who was saying, woman, I'm I'm not afraid of being shot. I'm not afraid of the rockets destroying my city. The thing that keeps me awake at night is, what if the West stops supporting us and my children are going to have to live under a Soviet system where they're encouraged like to rat on their families, or just everything that makes life enjoyable involves freedom, and we lose this war, it's gone.
And there's going to be
So
effects across the world. I mean, it doesn't stop at the Ukrainian borders. Fueling our bodies for peak performance is one of the most important parts of our preparation. It's also one of our most difficult choices. We live in a world full of options like energy drinks, shots, gels, and snacks. Mod balls is the natural choice. Just a 20-gram mod ball packs 10 times more energy per gram than the other options, and they're safe for active kids, adults, and athletes. Macronutrients from 75 fruits, veggies, seeds, nuts, chocolate, and raw honey replace caffeine and sugar, increasing energy without creating a jittery stimulant buzz or sugar crash. Plus, mod balls are only 100 calories. They're individually wrapped, organic, vegan, dairy-free, soy-free, gluten-free, HFCS-free, and GMO-free. They're also $10 off your first order when you use code JED, J-E-D, at modballs.com.
and okay, since I see by body language and you're nodding that you don't seem to mind my giving geopolitical speculations, I have a theory that I haven't heard from anybody else, but here goes. If I were Chairman Xi and I'm under all sorts of financial and demographic and food stress, my country's in really big trouble. The traditional way for a dictatorship to dodge enormous domestic dissatisfaction is to have an outside distraction, right? And Taiwan, I think everybody thinks that's going to be Chairman Xi's distraction. The Mitzi theory is that's too big a hill to go for. Instead, go for a softer target. Uh, for at least 150 years, China and Russia have been at each other's throats over Vladivostok. Vladivostok, in the far east of Russia, used to belong to China. China bitterly resents that Russia has its former territory, and uh, then there's another thing that would really make China find going into Russia attractive. Lake Baikal, uh, bigger than all the Great Lakes system put together, has abundance of water that could be piped to China, which is suffering a 100-year drought. Russia has said no. Imagine if if China could solve its problems of needing a patriotic distraction in the form of a war, and it could say, we're getting Vladivostok back, we're getting minerals, we're getting room for our population. Uh, Russia's distracted elsewhere. I don't think that there would be a worldwide rage at China for going after Russia. They'd probably say, God bless. Why isn't that the best chess move for Chairman Xi?
It's an interesting theory. I have not heard this. I haven't heard this theory at all because it'd be
Well, because
interesting.
it's the Mitzi theory. They have a border. It's around, I don't know, is it like 1,600 miles? How do you defend a 1,600-mile border when
Well,
when well, all your population is 10 time zones away?
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, look at the challenges
Okay,
that we have
so
here and on our borders.
right, so you heard it here. I broke the news.
Yeah, that's it. We're gonna have to cut this section and save it because this might be you might have called it way earlier. But it's an interesting theory. I mean, what happens if you put Russia into a two-front war? Because that's essentially what would happen. And then you look at the recent interaction between the Russians and the Chinese. They had they had the meeting here about 2 weeks ago. They sat down. You look at Chairman Xi trying to potentially be a power broker on the global scale, trying to change the world order, as I've called it on previous discussions. We have to think about that. And is it a ruse, right? Is it a bait and switch? Is it is it the you keep your friends close and your enemies closer? Maybe that would back up your theory that he's making it look like they're going to be friendly. Maybe they give them arms and then maybe they go after them some way. That's very interesting.
Well, invite me back a year from now and let's see what's happened.
Let's see. I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you that right before when the Russian war kicked off in Ukraine, I had Jack Devine on. Jack Devine had been on episode 13 originally. He was one of the primary architects of the CIA, especially the intelligence department, over the course of the last 50 years. And he wrote a book called Spy Master's Prism about a year before that. And Spy Master's Prism was all about how we were spending too much time focused on China because the threat was Russia. And as we were consuming ourselves with this push into the Pacific, the Russians were actually gaining ground in cyber warfare. They were gaining ground in information warfare. They were influencing our elections. We can argue all day to what extent, but that was where the fight was. And then the Russia-Ukraine situation kicks off. I called up Jack, and Jack said, nobody wanted to read my book for the last year. And now all of a sudden, everybody's buying my book. So, yeah, maybe we have a thing. We'll bring you back and we'll talk all about what happens in Taiwan, because it is really interesting. Let's talk about military support, though, that's going to Ukraine. You wrote an article recently over the last couple of weeks or so that talks about the importance of military aid, specifically the Abrams tanks. Now, I've been in close vicinity to an Abrams tank for plenty of my days. I've had them shoot rounds directly over my head, and I think I still have a headache from it. But we need to, you said, quote, we need to ensure that we're sending as much support as we can rather than just providing Ukraine with half measures that only perpetuate the war, unquote. What are those half measures, and what's the difference between the half measures and what you view as the full support?
Okay, well, it's really presumptuous of an 82-year-old woman to give opinions, but as we've already established, that doesn't stop me. The Abrams tank for me was a metaphor for just going all in. And my particular focus, by the way, is landmines. And the Russians are laying landmines at a spectacular rate. Ukraine right now is the most heavily mined country in the world or in history. And every day that goes on that they continue laying mines is probably 4 to 5 months that it will take to clear them. And I'm actually going to Ukraine again to attend landmine clearing school. So I'm going to know an awful lot more about landmines, up close and personal than I know just from interviewing people. But this war has to stop, because the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be for Ukraine ever to get its economy back. Here's something that I think isn't widely known. Landmines encourage human trafficking. And you might wonder, what could that connection be? And here's the connection. When an area is landmined and people can't earn a living because they can't go out, particularly in agriculture, that means that there are vast flows of refugees, and displaced persons are just the perfect hunting ground for traffickers. So back to the Abrams tank metaphor. My metaphor was give Ukraine enough to end this war, and soon, because the longer it goes on, when the war ends, there will still be years, decades of landmine clearing, and let's turn off the faucet.
Well, and the way that landmines are actually being employed too is at a wide, massive scale. We talk about cluster munitions and these artillery rounds that are being fired, and they have hundreds of smaller grenade-like mines that then get scattered across the farmland. Is a place that they're doing it. You wrote a piece not too long ago where you talked about the Russians placing mines and booby traps in children's rooms, so that when they come home and they find these things in children's rooms. Talk a bit about the use of these cluster bombs and why that has impacting the battlefield.
And when I was in Ukraine in December, I remember driving by, eyeballing it. It looked like thousands of acres of unharvested sunflowers. And there's snow in the ground, and poking through the snow are these black stalks with the heads of the sunflowers still there. And so I'm asking, why aren't these harvested? And the answer is, for each acre there might be 5 or 6 landmines. And the farmer, he risks his life if he's trying to go through with his equipment, because these mines are enough to certainly disable and ruin his equipment and possibly cost him his life. But what are the consequences of of I mean, I've heard estimates. Here's an estimate that I trust, and here's one that I'll entertain. I've heard that as of December of last year, 10% of Ukraine's prime agricultural land is mined and unusable. A current, here in in mid-spring, is that 40% of the land can't be farmed because of mines. And the consequences of that, on an individual level, it's the farmer who can't earn a living. I mean, he just can't go in and farm that land. On a national level, it means that the mainspring of Ukraine's economy, 40% of Ukraine's economy is agriculture. And if you can't farm the land because it's mined, this is a catastrophe for Ukraine. And then, of course, the the land that isn't farmed and the grain and oil seeds that aren't in the world market, that means that like Indonesia, Bangladesh, Egypt, there are countries where there will be famine because of the Russian mines. We've got to stop this, bring on the Abrams tanks.
One of the biggest challenges we have in building great organizations is accurately identifying the strengths and weaknesses of our team and our teammates. Compass Workforce Solutions is a certified predictive index partner. Since 1955, the Predictive Index Behavioral Assessment has objectively provided insight into employees' workplace behaviors. This allows us as leaders to predict what drives and motivates others, helps us to be better managers, and enables more effective communication to increase performance by really understanding who's on our team and what they do best. I've incorporated Predictive Index, Compass, and Christine Ippolito's team into every one of my businesses and my performance development programs. Incorporate science-backed behavioral assessment tools like Predictive Index into your organization today and see how quickly you reach your goals. Learn more about Compass and the Predictive Index Behavioral Assessment at compasswfs.com. You brought up human trafficking. You did a piece in September for the foreign press where you highlighted Russia's kidnapping of Ukrainian children and the shipping of them to Russia. You cited a number somewhere around 200,000, and that number I think was given to you by the police because the police are saying that they understand how many people were in the orphanages, how they've been emptied. There are reports this week that are coming out of Russia that Russian military forces and recruiters are going to bars and clubs and restaurants in Russia, and they're grabbing men as they come out of these establishments, and they're conscripting them into the military because they've had so much attrition of their forces. You witnessed, and you talked about witnessing some abductions firsthand when you were on the border in going into Ukraine. What are the Russians doing with these children, and why do they want them so badly that they're going in and taking them back to Russia?
Okay, my information for this comes from the Institute for the Study of War and also from General Nebitov in Ukraine. Russia is up against a cataclysmic population decline. There are experts, my favorite of which is Peter Zion. Their view is that Russia is in terminal decline. There just aren't enough babies being born. So one way of sort of a stopgap for this is when you kidnap 200 Ukrainian children, you're really getting a twofer out of this. You're demoralizing the Ukrainians. You're making their future, if you take away 200,000 children, what does that do to the future of a country with a population only a little over 40 million? I mean, that itself is demoralizing and bad for Ukraine's future. But the other part of this twofer is suddenly the Russians have 200,000, and probably more by now, children whom they can bring up as Russians. They're ethnically similar. They often speak Russian. It's the perfect way to help staunch the bleeding of their population that they're not producing enough children on their own. And by the way, I've talked with experts on this who speak Russian and make it a point to study this. They say, these are American experts, they say it's simply astonishing how public Russia is about what's a war crime. You can see, public officials in Russia uh, advocating or asking for Russian families to adopt these stolen children. That yeah, the thought is that yeah, if you're committing a war crime, you'd be kind of quiet about it. No, you can see on national television even as well as on the chat rooms and so forth, uh, the program of assimilating these stolen children. And oh, one other comment. Uh, you can read in the Western press that the figure is 15,000. I disagree with that, and I asked General Nebitov, you say more than 200,000, and yet the world press, every, wherever I look, or most places where I look, they're saying it's 15,000. Are you sure of those figures? And he said, yeah, we've got perfect records because, we're the police. We document crimes. They know by name from, like, say, the orphanages that the Russians just come in and take the children. Or we know, like, there's a summer camp and people are told, oh, give your children some respite. They can go to summer camp. And then the children never come back from Russia. And the police document crimes. And by the way, on that subject, even a few months ago, they had records. This is slightly switching topics, but of 56,000 documented war crimes where they know who did it. Maybe they have DNA, they've got witnesses. The police are on top of these.
Well, the difference in numbers is staggering. I mean, you're talking about abductions being reported as 15,000 to 200,000. In my research, you look at the numbers of deaths, and you have some organizations say 8,000 people have been killed. Others say 100,000 people have been killed, and then others say, well, it's 60,000. So I mean, all of this goes back to that information and the disinformation, and really who's putting it out, and what's the propaganda versus who are the independent organizations who may or may not even have the access to get the information to give a credible numbers on all sides. So it shows the complexity of the situation that this is, and how difficult it is not only to wage this battle, whatever side of whether you're on the Russians or the Ukrainians or any of the Western allies who are involved in this thing, but then also understanding the ground truth as to exactly what's going on becomes so difficult. We all agree,
Well,
and
I think that I
yeah,
have some fairly unique access because General Nebitov told me I'm the first Western journalist who took an interest in the police side of all of this. Well, I've started a crowdfunding effort, and the goal is $300,000 to go to the Halo Trust, which is the oldest and largest landmine clearing organization in the world. And by the way, it came to world attention, more than 30 years ago when Princess Diana uh, went across a minefield wearing the Halo Trust bomb-proof protection stuff. So it is, and I I want to. They at this moment they have 1,000 people doing mine clearing in Ukraine, but the sooner and more we have this mine clearing, the less human trafficking there will be, the less children who have their feet blown off, the less just the sooner the better that we do something about this. And so I've created a, a donor funded uh, campaign, and it's called Donor, as in I give you, so donor, DONOR, C, as in I'm looking at you, so donorc.com/Ukraine. And uh, from my point of view, one of the beauties of this is, well, first of all, I'm matching up to the $100,000 mark. I'm matching every dollar that's given. Uh, on top of that, I've committed to a weekly vlog in which I tell about kind of exciting ways that we have of mine clearing. I was unaware of this before, but there are actually university specialties in mine clearing. So we know an awful lot about how to do it and how to do it better. There are mine sniffing dogs, there are robot dogs, there are drones that can see, like with x ray vision. There's a lot of really cool, neat stuff. And anybody who gives $5 or more to donorc.com/Ukraine, you will get weekly updates from me, including when I'm in landmine clearing school. I'll talk about, you know, up close and personal experience of what it takes to do demining.
How does this end? How long
Okay,
does this
I
go
have a
on?
theory. I'm not short of theories. Uh, I have a pretty strong impression that, and talking to a military man, I ought to have more humility, but oh well, uh, that the finance that backs the war is the real field of battle. And I have a globe or an image of a globe that shows the size of countries not by their geography, but by their finances. Uh, we're probably, I think we're approaching 30 trillion for GDP. Russia is 1.6 trillion. And to put that in perspective, that's a little bit less than the GDP of South Korea. Uh, how does, I mean, the, oh, and then a lot of Russia's income comes from arms sales. Right now, they have proved that instead of being the second most powerful arms dealer in the world, um, that they're second to Ukraine. I mean, and and also, I've read reports that you mentioned ordnance, the unexploded ordnance, that up to 60% of what they fire doesn't explode. And that it still leaves it dangerous for Ukraine. But who wants to buy arms from Russia when A, they don't work, and then there's a B to this calculation. Uh, if you're buying arms from Russia, you want them when they're promised. However, Russia has less and less arms that they can promise you arms in 2024, but you may not get them till 2030. And then what about the reliability of the arms that you'd buy from Russia? Uh, you really want to have experts who can go service whatever you've bought. They don't have that now, or they've got tiny amounts of it. So a large part of Russia's income is is destroyed because their arms. I mean, they haven't lost all their arms industry, but they're losing a large part of it. Uh, I I think that Russia's going to fall apart economically.
I think that's an accurate assessment. I was listening to an interview with Janet Yellen just the other day, where she was asked a similar question: as how are the economic sanctions against Russia affecting their ability to continue the war in Ukraine? And one of the factors that she brought in has been the international cap that's been put on the price of Russian oil. And so when you look at, you referenced arms sales as being a primary driver of their economy. Well, oil is also a primary driver of their economy. And if we limit the amount that people in other countries on the global scale can actually pay for Russian oil, well, now you've limited their ability to upcharge, create more income, and drive that revenue stream down. And coupled with the fact that on the arms sales side, they have to push so much money, so many of the arms that they're producing into their own military versus selling it, you're creating now a very difficult situation economically for them to begin to continue to fund the war. So I agree with you.
I almost don't care that. I mean, I certainly care, but it's not my primary concern of how many hundred yards get gained or lost in Bakhmut. What I care about is the sanctions, the
Yeah.
inability to have income from arms sales. I think that's what's going to determine the war.
Who can negotiate an end? Can an end be negotiated?
What I'm afraid of is if we negotiate an end, that the 56,000 war crimes that we're aware of would probably be negotiated away. I really hope that as a deterrent for the future, that people who've had war crimes, that there's a penalty for them. So I hope it ends rather with Russia can't buy more arms, can't recruit more people. I want defeat.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
think
want all the blood that's been shed by and all the blood and all the suffering that the Ukrainians have gone through to go for nothing, and 10 years from now it happens all over again.
What gives you hope in this situation?
As of December, I found the morale of every single person that I talked with to be extraordinary. They're fighting for their way of life. They're fighting for their future. They're fighting for their children. I would put their morale of everybody I talked with, and I talked with people like in restaurants or ladies' rooms or office buildings or on the street. What gives me hope is, A, that I think that the Russian economy is going to be revealed to be in tatters and that they just can't afford to keep on. And B, the Ukrainians are as all in as human beings can be. And they're up against people who are fighting on the other side, who are there because of fear that if they don't move forward, they're going to be shot in the back.
Yeah, I mean, this is a threat to civilization, and that civilization of the Ukrainian people and their society, and you've seen them rally down to every single person, in that country, and bring in so many of the international allies and partners to be involved in this thing, because it truly is. We're not calling it a world war. We're not calling it, the start of something greater than a regional conflict potentially, but we have to look at it like that. And you're doing an absolute fantastic job of getting yourself in there. You referenced a couple of times that you were 82 years old and you were still doing this, and we talked about it before. But I think I'd put you up against absolutely any other war correspondent and journalist out there on the front lines. We talk about leading from the front on the Jedburgh Podcast all the time. That's where leaders live. That's where they have to build their momentum to change society, change the world. You and I have talked a lot about journalism. We've talked over the last year and a half as we've gotten to know each other, and how important that is to you and how important that is to me. And you're bringing us the stories from where the action is, and I thank you for that. And I can't wait to see what your next trip brings. And thanks for continuing to lead from the front and showing us all the way that it needs to be done.
Well, I love being on your show because, immodestly, I think we're kindred souls.
I think so too. I like that. Well, thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you so much. And I can't wait to come back.
Oh, definitely. Well, we have a lot to talk about on the next one. We still have to get into the book, so that's the plan for the next one.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. American Jedburghs went out to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Director to the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other behind-the-scenes content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, Talent War Group, and our sponsor Jersey Mike Subs on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As a former member of Special Forces, the Jedburgh Podcast donates a percentage of all proceeds to the Green Beret Foundation, supporting America's Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.